Today, Josh and I are going to be going through, does development equal value of life? We're going to be addressing what the primary arguments are on the pro-choice side for third trimester, second trimester, and first trimester. We're going to go through why, if you say you only support one of those but not the others, how it's quickly inconsistent and can only be based in your opinion rather than a stagnant standard that you can apply to everything. So like always, drop a comment if Josh said something really stupid.
So when we're talking about like the pro-choice, at which point does development equal value? I think it's really important that we start at the furthest date, right? We start at 9 months, because not every pro-choicer is going to say that they're pro-choice all 9 months, right? But there's enough of them out there that we kind of need to cover it, because again, 9 month or abortion in the third trimester is super rare. It's not something that happens all that often, but it's still something I think is worth covering.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think one way that I really like that we're going about it from working from the third trimester back is you'll see a lot of people saying, people in the second trimester that are pro-choice, but only for second trimester, saying that, well, the third trimester is when it gets evil, but then you back it up and you say, no, people standing in the first trimester will say, no, the second trimester is evil.
Yep.
But once we kind of break it down, you'll see how it's really arbitrary to take any of those stances.
Right.
So third trimester, what's kind of like the main flagship arguments?
Well, I would say the main argument is, well, you can use those, that's the other issue, is that you can use body autonomy for like all arguments. And so I think that one for sure would be like the big one, is that it is a woman's choice because it is her body that's carrying the child in the third trimester, right? So even at that point, she has the ability to end their life. But yeah, other than that, it's like mostly just health of the mother. Like there really isn't a whole lot of arguments why we should be able to abort a 9-month-old fetus. And again, most pro-choicers will be like, no, that's wrong, right? And actually, I think this is why this is pushed so hard. Like if you look at the 2024 election, Trump was like harping partial birth abortion, 9-month, third trimester, right? He wouldn't answer a question about abortion earlier in the pregnancy, but this was the one, because even the pro-choicers are like, no, we're not doing 9-month abortions. This is not chill, right? Mm-hmm. But even with that, kind of like you were saying, there is an inconsistency, because if you say, well, this is evil at 9 months, well, why is it evil at 24 weeks?
Correct,
right?
Yeah. I think one thing too, once you get into like the third trimester, anytime abortion is mentioned, the baby could just be delivered.
Right.
That's the one thing that also gets really evil about it, because if they're saying that we want to do an abortion at the 9-month mark, why can't you just do a C-section? Yep. Even if it's at life, even if it's risking the mother's life, all that can usually be settled by a C-section.
Yeah.
So where the mother is not endangered and the child is not in danger too. So once you get into that third trimester, some people, you can really see their intent behind it.
Correct.
And what I find is sometimes people who also support third trimester abortions also accept after birth abortions, which then it would just be killing, right?
Yeah, it's just.
I think isn't it like Peter Singer?
Peter
Singer argues for that.
Does he? Okay, yeah. No, I'm unaware of that, but no, that would be the next step. You can't really get later than third trimester abortions, but like you were saying, when it comes to like the medical procedure of a C-section is almost always going to be safer than an abortion, right? For both, obviously for the one patient, the child that's murdered, but almost always for the mother as well. So then we have the next area would be the 24-week cutoff, which is like the viability cutoff, right? Because children will generally survive after 24 weeks, but before 24 weeks, it's much more it's not super likely.
A little more complex. Yeah.
What was the youngest fetus? Because you had told me.
I think the newest youngest one is 21 weeks. Before it's 22 weeks,
okay.
And now it's been pushed to 21 weeks.
Okay.
So still should be protected before then, but if they're using the viability.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. It's like 24 weeks, we know for sure that we can probably keep this person alive, so we shouldn't be able to take them out after this. A lot of pro-choicers will make that argument. But again, I do think it falls apart for the same reasons as, the third trimester. That's going to be repeated. I'll try not to say that every time we come to the next table of like contents or whatnot. The other thing about 24 weeks is that there's not necessarily a consensus. That's not the word. Consensus.
Consensus, yeah.
There's not necessarily a consensus when it comes to consciousness, but this is kind of what like science will say at 24 weeks when they're viable, that's when we'll respect their consciousness, which is crazy because I don't think like newborns are conscious in the way that you and I are, right?
I know a lot of like old people that aren't like conscious too. I think it gets interesting because we have to go into the definition of like what consciousness should be protected, right?
Right.
Because consciousness can be a scale.
Yeah.
Right. So like, should we protect altered consciousness? I guess like go into like why do you think consciousness shouldn't be an equation in this?
Well, I would say because all life, regardless of the consciousness, is created in the image of God and needs to be respected because I believe in equal human rights, regardless of like the stages. And I think you and I have both made shorts on like old people with dementia. Well, that doesn't like an unborn toddler, old man with dementia. They are all human. They all deserve the same level of rights. And so that's where I would sit with that. Do you have a difference of opinion?
Well, yeah. Just because someone doesn't have consciousness doesn't mean that we can inflict harm on them. For instance, like if somebody was under anesthesia, they're not conscious, right?
Right.
So if we go and rip their heart out while they're under anesthesia, that would still be taking a life and would still be immoral.
Yep.
Even though if they didn't have consciousness to experience that.
Right.
Them being human and them being alive is enough to be protected.
Yeah.
Like they don't need anything else in order for us to grant personhood.
And I have heard the argument that because people that are asleep, they don't have consciousness currently. Well, they will obtain it shortly, right? Somebody who's in a coma, maybe coma's not the best, but somebody who's under anesthesia, they will get their consciousness back.
Yeah.
That's the argument, and a fetus won't. And it's like, no, they will. A fetus will necessarily have consciousness if you let it develop, right? Or them develop. And so I think that's the other big issue with the 24-week cutoff.
Yeah, I can't remember. There's one of the big TikTokers. I can't remember his name. It's the big ones.
Dean Parker.
Yeah, it was Dean or Parker. They made the argument that it's the past consciousness that grants personhood, which again kind of falls into what standard?
Right.
Like
that would
why?
I don't know if I'm prepared for like the. Have you heard of flow before as future like ours as an argument that we should defend people because they have a future like ours? And I think that kind of gets into like the experience argument. I don't know.
I don't know if I've heard that. That would be fun doing a whole video on that, but I haven't heard that.
Anything else on 24 weeks?
No, I think 24 weeks. I think we kind of nailed that one.
Okay, you're okay with abortions at 24 weeks?
Nope.
Next would be anatomy scans. At 20 weeks is kind of when you get one of the first anatomy scans to try to figure out if the child has like a malformed brain, heart defects, if their organs are, proper. And so this was a big cutoff. I know somebody who was an L&D nurse for 20 plus years, and this was kind of her area because she's like, well, listen, there are babies who form without lungs or with a heart that isn't going to work. So like it would be cruel to have that mother carry that child from 20 weeks all the way to birth just to have them die within the next 15 seconds, right? As soon as they're born, they're going to pass away, and that's cruelty. So there is a cutoff there where if this baby does not have a brain, why would we force the mother to go through all of pregnancy for a child that she's going to lose anyways? We can cut the harm down so much earlier.
Well, it's funny because if like a child is diagnosed with terminal cancer, we don't say the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Like we don't say, well, yeah, like little Timmy he's really fun, really cute kid.
Yeah.
But terminal cancer, so like let's just cut
to the chase.
Yeah.
Actually, you're gonna die one day, so let's just cut to the chase.
Yeah. Unfortunately,
I don't know about myself. I've been pretty good so far. So. Then the other thing about 20 weeks is that apparently kids don't feel pain. That's what I had found in my Google searching. But when I had read that to you on the drive over here, you had mentioned.
Yeah, there's actually recent studies. We'll put them in the comments just because they're not cement yet, but there's studies that suggest that at 12 weeks they could also feel pain. But I guess kind of going to, I don't think pain equals value of life.
Right.
Like there's many people who
nerve damage.
Yeah, nerve damage. That doesn't mean that we have the right to do harm to them because they can't feel it.
Right. No,
it kind of goes back to the anesthesia thing. Just because they cannot feel pain doesn't mean that we get to inflict harm on them.
Yeah.
And it still be moral.
Yep. No, again, with these different well, I'm okay with this, but not okay with that. A lot of these have overlapping points, right? And so, and you had just mentioned that pain at 12 weeks. So the next one on the list is 12 weeks, right? And so for sure, a 12-week-old fetus is not viable. Their brain is not developed. They are not aware of themselves, obviously, right?
Yeah.
They cannot feel pain, potentially. And obviously, the earlier you get in the pregnancy, the more safe the abortion is for the mother. So if you let a fetus develop from 12 weeks to 20 weeks, well, that raises the unsafe measure that will have to take place for that abortion. So at 12 weeks, that's kind of like, this is the most standard pro-choice.
Yeah.
This is what we believe. 12-week abortion. It's moderate. It's compromising. This is what we'll stop abortions after this. Again, the average pro-choicer you talk to will say 12 weeks. After that, we probably shouldn't murder them. Before that, it's not a big deal.
I think it's funny because even when you talk to people who support 12 weeks, they still have some hesitancy, right?
Yeah.
They'll say 12 weeks, it's immoral, that life should be protected. And then you ask, well, will you stand with me against abortion? And they'll go, well, it's the woman's choice.
It's her choice still,
right?
Yeah.
But like, it's a life, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it goes back to, it's a life. It doesn't need a life plus something.
Right.
So again, I don't see anything that increases the value before or after 12 weeks that it didn't already have.
Exactly. Yep. And then, like you said, a lot of them will rely back or like fall back to, body autonomy. It's still a woman's body, right? Mm-hmm. So even though they think 12 weeks, when they're actually in the discussion, then they begin to push that back further, right? But again, a lot of legislation with pro-choicers will circle around the 20 or the 12-week spot, and I'm pretty sure like 90 or 95% of abortions take place between 10 and 15.
Yeah.
Like that's the area that all of these kids are being murdered. But obviously, we think all abortion is wrong.
I think that's what we were kind of tying into at the beginning, or kind of hinting at least, with once you ask somebody if they will stand against it, if it's 12 weeks, and they'll say, no, woman's choice. Well, then you just justified third term, right?
Yeah.
Like somebody in third who is pro third term abortion will say the exact same thing verbatim.
Yeah, no, for sure. And then I would say as we move on, earlier than 12 weeks, now we enter like the pro-life territory, where a lot of pro-lifers, not all of them, but a lot of pro-lifers are like, well, listen, after 6 weeks, you can't murder them. 6 weeks though, that's the heartbeat laws. Like this is kind of where the pro-life movement, or a lot of pro-life-ism, is kind of centered around, because it's the pro-choicers say 12 weeks. If we say 6, we can begin to pull that 12 back to maybe 10, maybe 8, maybe back to 6, right? And so again, do you know off the top of your head how many states have heartbeat laws, or roughly? It's something like 8 or 9.
I can't. It's something like that. I know Florida.
6 or 7.
Oh.
6 or 7 have.
Half of our audience just clicked off right now. I hope you're happy. Viewership just plummeted.
Worth it. Florida, Georgia, Iowa, and South Carolina, according to Google AI, all have heartbeat laws starting at 6 weeks.
Okay. I think it's funny because a lot of pro-lifers will say that they're okay with that, right? Mm-hmm. That they're for heartbeat bans and heartbeat laws, but they'll end there. They won't go further. So up until 6 weeks, they're pro having women have the choice.
As an abolitionist, I would argue that probably half of the pro-life movement is actually just pro-choice. They just don't like the pro-choice word. Like they want to call themselves something different. But again, that's an argument for a different time. But with the 6-week legislation, one of the things is that the pro-choice side will say that most women don't even know, maybe even pro-life side will say, most women don't even know they're pregnant by that point, right? So it's actually immoral to force a woman who doesn't even know she's pregnant to then carry a baby for 9 months, right? And so obviously there's a debate to be had there. And then you have the whole like no brain, no pain, all the other things for later trimester abortions kind of wrapped into this 6-week idea, right?
Which is funny because like some men don't know that they're fathers until the child is X amount years old. So does that mean that they should have the same rights? Just because they don't know if there's a child there, does that give them that right to do that?
Yeah, you don't know that you're your father, right?
I'm not a father.
I did notice that I skipped over one, which is ensoulment. In Islam, it is 120 days or about 19 weeks. That's when they think the soul is actually. So Islam permits abortion to 19-week point, right? So I did kind of move over that because it's less common of an argument of like you're not going to see. I mean, from time to time you'll meet a Muslim that's like, yeah, well, we're pro. My understanding at least, a lot of them will say they're pro-choice, just because they kind of want to appeal to like the Western liberal mindset. Yeah. But in all reality, 19 weeks, that's whatever. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just question that we should take their opinion seriously when they marry 6-year-olds.
It's kind of Islamophobic, honestly.
Maybe, but just towards Prophet Muhammad.
To be clear, when you cut his head off, I don't, bad. So after the 6-week period, then we get into like the actual nitty gritty, right? We won't have abortion at 6 weeks, but you can have one within the first 2 weeks, right? Like there really isn't a lot of legislation or bills being pushed under that, with the exception of a opinion that I had when I was pro-life, which was that because implantation is when a child is implanted into the mother, before implantation, it's actually acceptable to end that child's life with birth control or what have you, because there's so many embryos that are naturally washed out, like fertilized eggs that become embryos that naturally don't become implanted. I'm like, well, I'm not calling that murder or death. I'm just not going to do it. So if life begins at conception, and conception, under my understanding at the time, was implantation, I actually was like, yeah, I'm fine with any sort of abortifacia or any sort of birth control that would end the pregnancy before it's implanted. As soon as it's implanted, all right, that's a life. We got to protect it. Before it's implanted, well, not my problem, which I think has led into my like not being knowledgeable about IVF at all. Because I was just like, well, they're not implanted. Why would we care one way or another?
Yeah, and that almost ties into environment. Does not mean that that's when personhood begins.
Right.
Like if they're in the womb, doesn't mean that that's when life begins. If they're on, what would it be, like a vial? I don't know what.
Yeah,
IVF,
exactly. Yeah. No,
like that's
test
still a
tube.
human inside a vial.
Yeah. Everything special about you came out of a test tube. I'm a fancy guy with a suit. Take that away. What am I? You know, Avengers?
No.
Okay, sorry.
So we went through third trimester, second trimester, first trimester, and it feels like every argument that we've seen has been somewhat based in opinion, that if you say, oh, I'm for first trimester, but not second and third, like what reasons do you have to believe that?
Right. Yeah. Well, again, and like you said at the beginning, the reasons that you can be pro third trimester late term abortion, which most of them will say, no, I don't want doctors going in and cutting up babies. Well, a lot of those reasons can be applied to younger children, right? In fact, there's actually better reasons, because at 20 weeks, you know that this child will have some sort of mental illness. And obviously these people view that as a lesser thing, right? But like vital organs, so obviously it's better. So in all reality, there's like an inconsistency with a lot of these pro-choicers where it's like, well, you should be extending this longer. We should have third trimester abortions. So you really know. One of the ones I just thought of right now, it's too late in the video, Down syndrome. Because like in Iceland or in Europe somewhere, they've cured Down syndrome.
Yeah.
Because they just abort them. I think it's 8 weeks. I think you can detect Down syndrome at 8 weeks. It's something like that. And so I completely forgot to put that on my list. But yeah, that's the type of thing where it's like, let's say you're a 12-week pro-abortion guy. Well, what if there's a disease that comes about at like 16 weeks? It's more consistent to be like, well, if we really care about women, to push that later. So again, it is just all very arbitrary. Right?
Yeah. Thank goodness they don't do autism instead. Otherwise, I think they would start with you, Josh.
But we know that life begins at fertilization. So if we are to actually protect, the children in the last trimester, or the third trimester, the second, the first, implantation, all of it, it's fertilization. That's the view. Life begins at fertilization when the sperm meets the egg. That sperm and that egg don't exist anymore. It's an embryo. It's its own. Well, at that point, it's a zygote, right? But that's,
its own unique DNA.
Yeah.
That's separate from the mother and the father.
Correct.
And it's living. So it should have its own human rights.
Correct.
And part of those human rights is the right to not be murdered,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So those are kind of the arguments that we saw for, like, when you're looking at abortion right inside the womb. Some people will make the argument of what comes afterwards. So that goes into, well, the child will be born into poverty. The child will be born into Down syndrome, like talked to, or incest. So they go into genetics,
Rape.
Which, yeah, we'll make a whole nother video about that, because I think that would be fun to look at what happens afterwards that they use to justify abortion inside the womb too, because that's a big one. So we'll circle back to that. But any closing thoughts?
Not off the top of my head, no.
If you know a better argument for any of these, leave it in the comment, and maybe we'll do a part 2 to this. What do you think of that?
That would be great.
Yeah. All right.